Well, welcome. Thank you for being on my podcast. The Nervous System Reset is a book that you wrote. Such a big topic, and I wanted to kind of dive into it after asking you what made you get into this work
It's
and,
such
and, and then ultimately writing this book.
it's such a great question, John. So there's obviously professionally, I was working as a physiotherapist, which is
Hmm.
traditionally, looking just at the body, as we've liked to compartmentalize in a lot of the biomedical field. But a lot of the patients that I was helping were coming in with not just body based issues. They might have physical pain, but they'd also have anxiety, gut
Right.
issues, and maybe some things like they weren't sleeping. I felt like what I was looking at was sort of just above the surface of the water, like an iceberg.
Hmm.
And I knew that if I could understand the way that their brain and body were communicating and perpetuating cycles of pain, inflammation, that I
Hmm.
could really help. And I lent more into understanding the brain, with how the body
Hmm.
was influencing the brain. And I ended up closing my own physiotherapy clinic. I actually ended up getting really immersed in the work myself because my brother passed away in 2017, and it was a really shocking experience. So I went
Hmm.
through that period of dysregulation. So
Yeah.
it was really about learning to walk the talk, so to speak. But I spent that 2 years really studying, but
Hmm.
also integrating all this work with the nervous system and understanding why sometimes I felt like I couldn't get out of bed and
Right.
sometimes I was hypervigilant. So it was both a personal and professional time. And then when I came back to treating patients again, I began educating people on the nervous system and these responses and what I'd learned about the vagus nerve, and using transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation. And I saw that there was, a real need for this knowledge. Like, it really empowered people, and that in
Hmm.
itself brought regulation because people understood what was going on. And then the workshops that I led for my patients, they just took off. Like, people really wanted to feel like they could get back into the driver's seat. And
Hmm.
so that really began how we now share our online courses and programs. But it was very much from a personal and professional place that it all came to be.
Yeah. Um, which obviously creates the passion. Hey, before we continue, my accent radar is really dull. I want to practice. Is it Australia?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Nice. Got it. Okay.
Ding,
Um,
ding, ding.
yes. I watch a lot of Bluey. I think Bluey is in Australia because of my
Yes,
kid.
my daughter
Yes.
loves Bluey.
Oh my gosh. Um, just to break it down, when you have a dysregulated nervous system, what are the common symptoms of that? So because of story or because of whatever, or a death or a breakup, a lot of things can dysregulate our nervous system. Um, what are the results of that? So what's the byproduct, would you say, that most people have because of a dysregulated nervous system?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we might look at one aspect of being like the on button is jammed. So if, like, you
Mm,
imagine that the on button on your brain and body is held down, you've got this mobilizing energy that makes you either anxious, angry, hypervigilant,
mm,
overwhelmed. It's like even when there's nothing going on, you can't sit still. And so you might feel yourself fidgeting, like you're like, I'm too antsy to sit here and take in information or do what I need to. That can also then present with physical symptoms, like the gut is one of the main places we
yeah.
see this show up because of the way the vagus nerve communicates from the brainstem to the gut, and it will change blood flow, it will change motility or how food
Mm,
moves through the gut. So a lot of people first start noticing, oh God, I've got this gut pain. I don't know where this came from. The other thing can be with that sympathetic nervous system, or that mobilization, is not being able to sleep, because we technically need to wind that energy back to get to sleep
Right.
and stay
Right.
asleep. But particularly relationships are such a doorway or a window into this state. So we might recognize we ruminate about somebody, like, what are they doing? Why haven't they messaged me back? We might find that we're critical or judgmental with what we say, or we might become reactive and storm off. So I think relationships are a real window into that particular state. But we can also swing down to, it's like the off button is jammed. And so in that case, it's like we can't get any energy to
Oh, like shutting
face
down kind
whatever
of thing.
challenges we need to. Yeah. And
Um,
so
are we in, would you say we're in fight or flight? How is that state attached to the nervous system, dysregulated
fight or
nervous
flight
system?
would be the on buttons jam. So that would be the
Mm,
first one we talked about, like the
mm-hmm,
anxiety. And then
mm-hmm,
what people might say is more flop or freeze or collapse
right.
would be where the off buttons jammed. And then we really see like that sense of hopelessness. There can be shame, apathy. People
Yeah.
dissociate from their body. And we're really seeing now the association between dissociation from the body and our
Mm-hmm.
signals, and how that manifests as chronic health symptoms. Again, the gut, inflammation, the immune system, it changes that brain body signaling. So it's a little bit like the on buttons jammed, the off buttons jammed. And I would say, the off button being jammed shows up in relationships too, but we more isolate, stonewall, don't text
Mm-hmm.
people back, don't want to go out with our friends, don't want to see people. And then for some people, they'll oscillate between the two of those states, unfortunately. And that's where we'd see, if there's been traumatic stress, there'd be that oscillation more so.
So, what's interesting is our relationship can actually dysregulate us. Like we could have an amazing calm nervous system, then we get into a relationship, suddenly the relationship itself dysregulates us.
Exactly. It's like
Right.
one neurobiological unit between a couple, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much
Mm-hmm.
science that shows the synchronization of heartbeats. There's good
Yeah,
data
you're
to
talking about
show.
co-regulating, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can see, like, if we think of this as like, you know, inevitably we're going to have, we think we're so independent with our nervous systems, but they're relational. There is
Mm-hmm.
such a aspect where what's happening outside of us in our relationships impact on us. And yeah, co-regulation, I think, is the ultimate for helping us come back to regulation if we're
Mm-hmm.
lucky that we're around people that are regulated. But then there's also co-dysregulation, where, like you said, we can have our partner be a source of the thing that pushes us into being stuck on or stuck on
Mm-hmm.
off with our nervous system. So it's interesting, but those networks that have to do with attachment are the same for regulation. It's a shared pathway through the
Mm-hmm.
body and brain.
Realistically, though, there is both happening in relationships, right? It's not like the relationship is always dysregulating you or always co-regulating. It's a mixture of both, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think this is where we need to have this awareness of our own nervous system to recognize, oh, I'm reaching my limits, because
Mm,
say, for instance, my husband says to me before I'm about to go to work, I've got this problem I want to talk to you about.
right.
The way that I receive
Mm,
that's going to be completely different than if it's in the afternoon and I finish work for the day. So, that's where I've got to be able to say, well, look, I want to talk to you about this, but right now I don't have that capacity to do that. So,
yeah.
and I think, like, there has been a lot of talk around boundaries and ending relationships and cutting people out of your life. And I think that's not really fair all the time. Like, sometimes, yes, we do need to do that.
Hmm.
But if we look at this as some people have a chapter of their story that's really hard, and it doesn't mean, and that can impact on us, but that doesn't mean that the whole story is about that.
Yeah, I had a horrible habit of, I mean, all up until this relationship, right before we go to bed, you know, engaging in deep, conversations that are not going to be resolved that night, and hijacking my partner's nervous system, activating it, so I could have less anxiety, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So being aware, being aware of what you're doing to your partner, and also knowing that your partner's, wired differently than you are, and what may not activate your nervous system, may actually activate your partner's nervous system.
That's such good information to share because I feel like the best way we can use this knowledge is to know our own, but also
Hmm.
understand why other people are responding the way that they are
Right.
based on their nervous system. Because that's why I love this work so much, because so many behaviors make sense when we look at it through the lens of that nervous system. And I think for those people who do tend to be a little bit more on the anxious side, there can be that need to go for the reassurance. And
Hmm.
then we might say, well, hang on a minute, what do I actually really need here? Like, this is me being in that fight or flight. What do I actually need to do to take care of myself? And like, there may
Yeah.
be something that we need from our partner, but there may also be things that we need to do on our own to self regulate as well and build our capacity for self regulation too.
Yes, or else we're just going to always be dependent or putting that on our partner, which is not fair, right?
Exactly. Yes,
Um,
totally.
yeah, and this is like, I talk about laying new tracks in relationships, and the nervous system is a great way into this, being responsible for your nervous system, and self-soothing, reparenting, whatever it takes for you to lay kind of a new track, and it changes the dynamic of the relationship. So
Mm.
the big question, is, so how do we regulate our nervous system? But before I get to that, because it's such so broad, I'm sure there's, a thousand different ways. Um,
Yeah.
I have something that I don't know if someone's ever asked you before, and I don't know if you have the answer. We could probably come up with the answer together. Um, how does our nervous system how does our nervous system impact who we choose to love?
Ooh. This is a juicy one. I love when there's
Yeah,
questions that I've never been asked before.
because it's,
Um, it's
it's
a good
stuff that
question.
we're not really aware of that could be running underneath. So like you said, the different states. I wonder, how that impacts who we choose to love, who we're attracted
Mm.
to, who we date.
There's obviously familiarity, I'm going to say, that comes into this as well. And if we look
Hmm.
at the nervous system is impacted by our implicit memory. So they're the ways that we feel, not necessarily the explicit memories of what we might recall. For instance, an explicit memory might be you can remember riding your bike for the first time with no training wheels and see your bike
Hmm.
and see a parent and see the situation. But the implicit memory is that you know how to ride the bike without thinking about it. And
Mm.
we learn nervous system responses in the same way. And I'm going to say here that that probably is a little bit similar with attachment too. Like, there's an
Hmm.
implicit aspect of it. If we're not being aware of it, we might gravitate to what feels familiar. So
Hmm.
I think this is why we might repeat the same patterns a little bit, where, if okay, let's say we give the example of, if I get into a relationship and somebody doesn't text me back,
Hmm.
within the day, and I start to feel myself get anxious, and then I might play out that same pattern of leaning in, leaning in, leaning in, and I might, you know, tend to, I'm not going to say scare off my partner, but it plays out in that same dynamic. So if that person was securely, attached, or they were quite
Hmm.
regulated, they might find, well, this is a bit too much for me, and maybe those patterns don't work out. So I guess we could look at it as like, almost like the states can match attachment styles a little bit. So, like, the
Hmm.
sympathetic state matches the anxious attachment style, where we tend to lean in. And then the more of the shutdown, or that dorsal vagal or flatter state, might match a little bit more of the avoidant. But what we're looking for is regulation, which might be secure attachment.
Right.
So I guess if we
Well,
tend to,
with attachment, usually like I know there's a lot of different attachment styles, but if you break it down to just kind of avoidant and anxious, the opposites tend to attract each other. I wonder if it's the same with nervous systems, where a dysregulated nervous system would be attracted to a regulated one, or would a regulated one be attracted to a dysregulated one? That wouldn't make sense, would it?
I think that there would be an aspect of potentially the stuck on person and the stuck on off person potentially coming into a pattern together. If we're looking at like, I think there's so many times where one person will be more regulated and help the other person. It's not to say
Yeah.
that we're always regulated, just like we're not always secure. We have our stuff come up. But I think typically for a relationship to be long lasting and healthy, there would have to be an element where each person could self-regulate. They had some
Sure.
capacity for
Right.
that. But
For it
I
to be
do think there
sustainable.
is that matching, yeah, for sure. And then like two of the sympathetic or fight or flights would probably, there'd be a lot of anger, and two of the dorsal vagal states, or that shutdown or stuck on off, I think there'd be a lot of avoidance, that they would just not say a lot, not communicate a lot, and sweep a lot under the rug. So it probably could come in for anything, but I think it'd be a little bit the same of the avoidant and the anxious together, matched with the stuck on, stuck on off as well.
Do you think that because I know so if my nervous system is very dysregulated, generally cumulatively, I know it changes, of course, day by day. Someone who has a very regulated, what comes to my mind is a grounded person. And I guess it depends how you look at this, because we could even talk about, the way our stars are lined up in astrology, and I'm an Aries, so I'm a fire sign. So me being attracted to someone who is regulated or grounded or, earth, makes sense to me. I don't know if someone who is grounded would be attracted to someone who is dysregulated. Maybe they would, because it's kind of opposite, or it may translate as exciting, or maybe there's something in them that wants to take care of the other person or regulate them. I don't know.
Yeah, this is such a good question. What's your partner's star sign now?
Star sign? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm an Aries and she's a Taurus.
Oh my gosh. So I'm a Leo and my husband's a Taurus. So
Yeah.
I'm the same as you, and my husband is the grounded one.
Is Leo and Taurus are they a good match? Because I think Aries and Taurus because the horns,
Yes.
they're
Well,
strong
it's probably a
personalities.
little bit the same of the Leo, a lion and a bull, but my husband is
Oh, got it.
grounded and I'm fire as well. So I get exactly
Oh.
what you say.
Oh wait, is
But
Leo fire? Just like Aries? I didn't know that.
yeah. So
Okay.
we are and it's true. Like but he actually says, he's like, I love your excitement, passion, drive.
Right.
Like
Right.
he really likes that energy. But you know, I think we can look at this of, there's good and bad. It's all we can say. There's lots of aspects to it. There's the groundedness, but then I know sometimes then we can feel a little bit more stuck, maybe, if we tend to go that way. Or we can be like the mobilization. And in the book, I actually describe that sympathetic state as being like fire and too hot. If we're up in that energetic state there where it's too much. But that energy of the sympathetic nervous system state, or that fight or flight energy, when we couple that with regulation from the vagus nerve, that's actually what gives us passion, drive, focus. Like we can channel it in a way. And this is where I think there's no good or bad nervous system states. It's just the way they blend together. And it's really coming back with, if we put the relationship lens on it, it's really, we want to learn to respond to what's happening today rather than those old, like you said it before, laying those new tracks. I really love that for relationships. I think that's what we've got to learn to do today is like, okay, this is what's happening today in my body. This is what I'm recognizing. What do I need as well? And responding in a new way. Then our brain and nervous system relearn a new way to be in relationship.
Right.
People can relearn their attachment style. It's not set in
Yeah.
stone.
It's not dried cement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, perfect then. How do we get into, and I know it's a big tree to chop down, but how do we start regulating our nervous system since it is our responsibility, right?
Yeah,
Which you
exactly.
talk about a lot in your book, Nervous System Reset. I love how it's just straightforward, just resetting your nervous system, the title. What are some ways that we can start doing this?
Well, first of all, the like laying the foundation is a little bit like knowing the map, right? Like we're talking about these states, but it's really knowing what state you're in. And like I was saying with riding the bike, rather than just cognitively knowing this information, it's really about recognizing the bodily signals,
Yeah.
the different emotions that come along with it, but even like the thought patterns. So, say if I'm in that stuck on off state, I might have a narrative running in my head that this situation's hopeless. I'm never going to meet anyone great. No one's ever going to love me for who I am. And like that can be our story, and our body's narrative shows that with like a collapse, a shutting down, I give up. So we've got to know where we are to begin with. We hear a lot about like everyone should just do breath work. Everybody should use ice baths. But it's really like, well, where am I first? Because I think it's like helpful to see it for like the beginning of what state you're in. So it's a bit like having a map. And then we say, okay, well, if I'm in that stuck on off shutdown, I'm not able to muster enough energy to face the challenges in front of me. So what are the things that are going to bring like up regulate my nervous system? So for someone who's in real shutdown, where they're really disconnected and dissociated from their body, like they can't feel their body because of its traumatic stress, that person really needs to connect with their sensory systems. And that might be something like the proprioceptors in the body. And that can come from like pushing and getting feedback from the body to the brain saying, oh yeah, this is where my body is. That's where we look at things like weighted blankets as being so good, because you're basically turning up the volume on your body's signals to the brain, and it brings important regions of the brain back online. But then if you're looking at that sympathetic state, this is where things like ice baths might be perfect, because the water and the reflex that engages is bringing in the vagus nerve to bring us down. So we need to know where we are.
Even though the water's freezing.
Yeah. Put that fire out.
Yeah.
So it's like
real
we
quick,
need to know,
parasympathetic and sympathetic, for those who don't know, can you explain the difference?
Yeah, sure. So if we look at sympathetic, where that's talking about too hot, fight or flight, that's the stuck on. So we feel mobilizing energy. And then parasympathetic is interesting. We used to just think of this as the brake to slow us down, but we now know we've got two branches, thanks to the amazing work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who showed that, yes, we have part of the vagus nerve that takes us back to regulation. And then we have part of the vagus nerve that's a little bit like putting on a handbrake or pulling the emergency brake, and we come to a complete stop. And that's really the essence of shutdown. So this is why if we're already feeling flat, we just want to be mindful of not using more of those things that drop our energy even more. So specificity is a principle of neuroplasticity, like how we change. And so being specific with our tools and resources is really important as well.
So step number one, I'm just simplifying, but you're saying is we need to get out of our heads and into our body. So how you do it is on you, but dropping into your body, you mentioned a weighted blanket. It could be yoga. It could be, where I feel very connected to my body is on my motorcycle. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, there are different ways we can do it, but connecting to our body, that would be step one.
Yes.
Being aware of where you are, where your state is. And then what else? What are some other steps to regulate our nervous system?
One of my favorite things to build this capacity, right? Because
Mhm.
I think what we've heard so much about is that we want to be calm. And, that to me is a real
It's too
bugbear because,
simple. Yeah.
right? And like, if we're saying we're both tend to be on the fire, passionate, like
Yeah.
that's what is my drive to help people. I'm like,
Right.
I'm here for it. So it's learning to harness and channel that energy into a way that helps you achieve what you want to, right?
Hmm.
So if I tried to be calm all the time, I would be like massively suppressing my energy or
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this
Your
sense.
potential.
So
Right.
there's a way that we train ourselves to come into the state where we have mobilizing energy and we keep it in check with the vagus nerve. So, or AWE, or is a really amazing thing where, you take
Oh
a
yeah.
hike,
Oh, right. Right.
you're just like, oh my God, that's amazing. You take a
Hmm.
hike somewhere, you see a beautiful viewpoint, you
Hmm.
take in the stars, and you feel that mobilization, you feel the goosebumps over your body and you learn to experience that, but it's not pushing you up into the sympathetic fight or flight, but it's the same energy, but you're keeping it in
Hmm.
check. So it can be thought of as a way to expand your ability to have this mobilizing energy come in. It's the same with play as well. Like when we say play, people tend to think, what? But if you think of play for an adult, like, I mean, how much do we play? To me,
Hmm.
chatting with you right now and nerding out with somebody who
The
loves
form
this
of
work
play.
as much as me is definitely a form of
Right.
play. Like I can
Hmm.
feel this exciting energy being able to chat to you about this, but it's excitement, and my heart might be going a little bit faster. I can feel the energy, but it's not like I have this like pounding heart and clammy palms and tense jaw like I could from that sympathetic. So my invitation to your listeners, John, would be what feels like play for you. Like
Mm.
it can be that
Mm.
creativity. Like maybe being on your motorbike is play
Hmm.
for you, but it's a
Right.
really great way to
So,
exercise the nervous system.
I love awe. I love play. I love how practical these things are. Right, they don't require um, letters after your name, or it just they're everyday things that happen in our life, that happen under our nose, that we need to be mindful of and lean into. The word that I used a lot post divorce, and I think my nervous system was very activated. Or it was on, or it was off, is the word nectar. And I
Mm.
was just rebuilding my life. I was broke. I had nothing but a motorcycle and styrofoam coffee is all I could afford. So I was forced to seek nectar, and so I got a hummingbird as a reminder tattoo on my bicep. And
I love that.
it reminds me of awe and play. Like um, it's almost meditative, right? So and all isn't just like something spectacular. I always say, when Rosa Parks decided to not go to the back of the bus, there was a moment of awe, right? So or you could see awe on a mural. You could see awe in anything. You could see awe when you make eye contact with your child. Like there's so many ways to experience awe, and then play. Yeah, I think play so many different ways. You know, flirting can be play. Playing with your child literally can be play. I like what you said, that like this, us, bantering and nerding out on this stuff is a form of play, but it's not setting you, like if you were to now go from here to doing a TED talk, you might, even though you're talking about the same thing, um, public speaking, brings anxiety, and get people get nervous. So that could then not be grounding for you.
Yeah, it can be a stretch, right? So
Yeah.
this is the whole thing. If we look at that zone of regulation where we're at right now, and if we're always told to be calm or not experience stress, I think that has the eventually that's going to shrink our
Hmm.
capacity for stress. So, like what we're talking about, if we come into this state where it's like, I'm stretching my nervous system, but if the TED talk was like straight after this, as you said, with no warning, then
Yeah.
that would be almost like straining the nervous system. It's
Right.
like a muscle.
Right.
We stretch it, but we're not straining it. And
Right.
so what a lot of people can do in really simple ways is look at like, okay, rather than look at stress as something to avoid, stress is only my nervous system mobilizing this energy to meet
Mm-hmm.
demands. And
Mm-hmm.
if I recover fully from it, like if afterwards I get that opportunity to come back to a regulated place, I'm actually training my nervous system a bit like I would if I was going to the gym and lifting a weight. But
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what we want to encourage ourselves to do. Like, okay, how can I step forward into things that are hard, but, you know, and it's okay to have some fear. It's okay to have some nervousness, but it's what's going to, then I'm going to come back to regulation. And the word we've got for resilience kind of sounds like, this stoic soldier on type of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
we're really in that place of resilience when we have tools and resources, or more tools and resources than the challenges we face, which I think a large part of that really comes from relationships, like the people that support us
Mm-hmm.
in our life. Like I think that's really the biggest thing for resilience.
So you're talking about who you choose to surround yourself with.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So
Definitely.
obviously not people who are toxic. This is why I say it's okay to send family to voicemail once in a while, to create a healthy distance. I talk a lot about life containers and in your container to make it safe. Yeah, boundaries. So is it really this simple in that creating a regulating your nervous system is dropping into your body, being aware, and then the practice of, so whether we're talking about play, awe, what meditation, motorcycle rides, whatever works for you, ice plunges, the practice of building that capacity, almost like threading that into your life, not just doing it one time over the weekend, but as a way of life.
Exactly. It becomes a way of life. There's this, I think this is different for everybody depending on, it's a little bit like the anxious or the avoidant
Hmm.
attachment is a little bit more that we might have a default or a way that we tend to swing more to sympathetic or more towards that, like a bit more of a shutdown. And
Hmm.
so it's going to look different. And I think it's like if we tend to be on that flatter side, it's almost like our bodily signals have the volume turned down a little bit.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the research has shown like people who tend to find it hard to connect with their body are more likely to be a little bit more on the depressed, flatter
Mm,
side. And
mhm,
so then the training is like, well, how can I turn the volume back up and connect with my body? And like for some people, like neurodivergent individuals might relate to this.
mhm,
It might mean setting an alarm on your phone so that you get a reminder to check in with your body if you tend to get so
mm,
lost up here. And then for those people who are more anxious, there's an overcoupling in the brain between the regions that let us understand the bodily signals being sent up to the brain and our
mhm,
fear circuitry. So it's almost like if we feel the heart fluttering or beating fast, it can be immediately interpreted as a threat. And then we find ourselves anxious. So in that case, it's a little bit more like learning to understand bodily signals in the present moment. Sometimes we have to sit with that and say, well, okay, yes, there's a little bit of like assuming that something bad's going to happen. And then being able to reappraise those bodily signals, like learn how. Let's say it was like you before bed, John, you noticing the anxiety. And then if you'd had that time and the skills to go, okay, I feel these sensations of anxiety. Let's sit with them. Let's see what happens. And then as you process that, you might find just like a wave on the top of the ocean, it calms
mm,
down.
mhm,
And then you might say, well, then you can start to look at this from a mindset point of view. But I think we're missing the part where we're able to bring in regulation through the body. And in times of stress, high levels of stress, from a neuroscience point of view, there's more activity in the survival brain, and that's in the lower centers of the brain. And that doesn't communicate with us through thoughts or narrative or language. It's communicating with us through sensations and emotions. So we need to come in to communicate with that part of our brain and tell it, like, things are okay down here. You don't need to be stressed. And that's when we'll then come back down. And then we can look at, okay, well, what am I believing about my relationship? What am I believing about myself? But I think we tend to go a little bit too much to the thinking first, and then we still get stuck in these cycles of stress activation.
I wanted to end with corrective experiences. I talk about this a lot. I feel like there's nothing more convincing than a new experience. And I think just as
Yes.
humans, as creatures, we are always living in our heads. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about earlier, distorted thought, whether we are future tripping or we are thinking about things that are not true, false beliefs. I'm not good enough. I'm not, this or this. The good will never happen to me, or I'm never going to find my person, or whatever. Like you said, the stories that we tell ourselves. A lot of that is distorted thinking, and that's all up here in the clouds, up in our head. But our bodies are what our bodies have gone through, and how we're wired, the imprints that the events have made. To kind of heal and rewire ourselves, it's not going to be something we can figure out. It's something I feel like we need to we need to have a corrective experience to convince our bodies that this is different, or that this is safe, or all of that. So what do you think about
Exactly.
corrective experiences and how that impacts our nervous system?
As soon as you said that, something in me went, yes, that's such a good way to explain it. Like, a corrective experience
Yeah.
is like a relearning. But if we look at this from the nervous system and the brain, they're not just passively receiving information. Through what you experience, they're actively reshaping themselves all of the time. Our nervous systems and brains are always changing. And it's through the experiences we have and the relationships that we're in and the environments we're in. So part of training ourselves or changing the way that we respond is really about having a new experience. I've never heard that as a corrective experience, and I love that, because it's actually part of why we do this work is to see reality as it truly is. Because so much of what we're doing when we're dysregulated is responding to the past. So
Right.
we need to relearn. Let's respond today to this person in front of us today, to this experience. And like, so much of the work when we come back into our body is actually unlearning what's happened in the past and creating a new experience through our brain body system that matches what happens today. And that's the essence of a healthy nervous system, is that we respond to what's happening today with the right amount of activation to match the environment we're in. And that's really where peak performance comes from. Like, we're able to say, I'm matching, if it's the TED Talk, I can match the activation of that. If it's that I'm lying on my yoga mat at the end of the day, I can match that with stillness and relax. Like, for some people, they can't do that. If I need to get angry, I can do that. So I think the corrective experience is such a beautiful way to put that relearning process.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of my for me to understand something, I got to kind of simplify it. And I've always thought, whenever I was dating, or whenever I was getting into a relationship, or if I was, anything in my life, a new friendship, I always ask myself, what kind of experience do I want to give myself? And how can it be corrective? In relationships, they're simple. I wouldn't say simple. They're common example of this because if you've been in relationships where you felt unsafe, if there was, any kind of abuse or cheating or anything that made you feel unsafe and activated, dysregulated your nervous system and threw you into fight or flight or freeze, convincing your body that this is safe, convincing your body you can lead into this. And of course, it takes effort and trust and work and all that. But if you could get there, then I think you'll show up differently in the relationship over time if your body starts to feel more safe, even though logically it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? What determines the state that we find ourselves in is happening in that lower center of the brain. So you're right, it's exactly about feeling safe again in the body. And that's the essence of how we build that trust, that we need as the foundation for a relationship. So yeah, so many nuggets of gold to take from what you've just said about that. Or I think that's can be really helpful if we find we have this urge to run away because
Hmm.
a relationship feels unfamiliar. If we've
Yeah,
never known what it's like to be with somebody who's grounded and calm. And the biggest thing is, so many people say it feels boring because there's not
sure.
this like up and down and up and down.
Right.
And that's a
Dopamine.
relearning of, well, relationships don't need to feel chaotic. They can feel peaceful and calm and trusting
Hmm.
and, knowing someone's dependable, which is, if we've never had that, we need to relearn, have that corrective experience, as you said.
Yeah. And also a good point. In the beginning, a corrective experience might repel you because it doesn't smell familiar. For example, if you're used to trauma bonds, someone who is safe and consistent and trusting may flip the magnet. You may then label this person as boring. But when you swim past the breakers and your body starts to trust it, then it becomes the new. And then what will repel you is the old. So,
Exactly.
anyway, thank you for being on my podcast. And where can they pick up your new book? Is it wide?
Head on over to my website, jessicamaguire.com. And yeah,
Hmm.
thanks, John. It's been so great chatting with you.
Yeah. Thank you for all the work that you're doing in the world. And go check out Jessica Maguire's book and the nervous system, a huge topic. If you don't know where to begin, as far as like you're not feeling aligned, or you feel a little depressed, or you just feel stressed out, the nervous system is a giant door. It can be the first domino. I mean, it's such a huge part of of the human condition. You can't go wrong. You could start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Be well.